It's a weeknight in 1968. The doorbell rings after dinner. Your father opens the door, and there's a man standing on the porch in a pressed suit with a briefcase and a smile he has practiced several thousand times. He is not a neighbor. He is not selling insurance, though the pitch will feel a little like that. He asks if he can come in for just a few minutes to show your parents something that could change their children's futures. 20 minutes later, he is sitting at your kitchen table with a single volume laid open across it. The pages are thick and glossy. There are full-color maps, cross-sections of volcanoes, illustrated timelines of human civilization. He tells your parents that everything their children will ever need to know, every science, every country, every historical figure, is contained across 32 volumes, which he can leave at your house as soon as you sign. The price is somewhere between $800 and $2,000. He has a payment plan. He explains, gently but clearly, that some families simply cannot afford to invest in their children's minds. He watches your father's face while he says this. That man sold more books in a single evening than most bookstores moved in a month. At his profession's peak in 1990, his company alone was doing $650 million in annual revenue. Then, in the span of 5 years, it was almost entirely gone. What killed him wasn't a competitor with a better book. It was a shiny disc that cost $99, and then, eventually, nothing at all. The encyclopedia itself is older than the country it would eventually be used to sell. On December 10, 1768, the Caledonian Mercury carried an advertisement announcing the publication of the first Encyclopedia Britannica, issued in Edinburgh, Scotland, in weekly installments by a Society of Gentlemen in Scotland. The first edition ran to 3 volumes, 2,391 pages, and included articles drawn from Benjamin Franklin on electricity and John Locke on human understanding. It was, by the standards of its time, a radical idea. All organized human knowledge, systematically assembled and alphabetically arranged, available to anyone who could afford it. For over a century, the encyclopedia remained primarily a scholarly and institutional product. Libraries, universities, wealthy households. What turned it into a mass-market phenomenon and created the encyclopedia salesman as a professional archetype was the marriage of 2 forces: American suburbanization and post-war parental anxiety. After World War I, the Britannica was purchased by Sears Roebuck, its offices relocated to Chicago, and by the end of the 1920s, 2,000 salesmen across the United States were selling it door to door on a commission of between $500 and $600 for each successful sale. The formula was already there. What the post-war suburban boom provided was the audience. A new middle class that had moved to identical houses on identical streets, that valued education above almost everything else, and that lived close enough together that a salesman with a good route could work an entire neighborhood in a single week. The pitch was never really about books. By targeting middle-income families and focusing on their aspirations for their children, Britannica developed a marketing proposition as compelling as the intellectual content of the product itself. By 1990, sales of its multi-volume sets had reached an all-time peak of about $650 million. That same year, 120,000 sets were sold in the United States alone. The price of a full Britannica set ranged from $1,000 to $3,000, depending on the binding, the accompanying yearbook subscriptions, and how skilled the salesman was at reading the room. Salespeople in good years took home 6-figure incomes. At its peak, Britannica employed around 2,300 door-to-door salespeople in the United States and Canada. The sales technique was a precisely engineered performance. The salesman arrived in the evening when both parents were home. He opened with the child. Where did they go to school? What did they want to be? What were they curious about? Then he opened a single volume, always at the most visually dramatic page, a full-color cross-section of the human heart, or a map of the ocean floor, or a double-page spread on the space program. He let the child reach for it. Once the child was holding the book, the sale was already half made. Prices of $800 to $1,000 were the norm, with the salesman making between a 30% and 50% commission depending on his sales volume. Easy payment plans made the product sound more affordable. Who couldn't be convinced that their child's future wasn't worth $19 a month? The encyclopedia companies had run-ins with the Federal Trade Commission for decades over their sales tactics. Britannica received a cease and desist order from the FTC in 1961 and a complaint in 1976, but the complaints barely slowed them down. The pitch was too effective, and what it was selling, the idea that knowledge had weight and presence and a place on a shelf, was something that even the parents who felt manipulated genuinely wanted to believe. What none of them could have imagined was that the very thing the salesman was selling would soon be rendered weightless. A complete set of World Book or Britannica in the living room was, in its era, a statement. Not merely a purchase, but a signal. To the neighbors, to the children, to anyone who saw the spines lined up on the shelf, that this was a household that took learning seriously. Children did their homework from these volumes. The texture of the research was physical, opening the right volume, running a finger down an index, turning pages until you found the right heading. Information had a location. You could dog-ear a page. You could write your name inside the cover. The set was yours in a way that nothing digital has quite replicated. The yearbook was a masterstroke of retention. Every year, the company mailed you a new volume, updating the set with the events of the previous 12 months. It arrived in the mail. It matched the spines of the original set, and it reminded you, annually, that you owned something that was still being cared for. Parents who might otherwise have felt buyer's remorse instead felt they were participating in an ongoing relationship with knowledge itself. What made the Encyclopedia Salesman possible was a specific combination of conditions, all of which would eventually erode simultaneously. First, a pre-internet information scarcity that made a comprehensive home reference genuinely valuable. Second, a suburban geography that put high concentrations of similar households within walking distance of each other. Third, a cultural moment in which parental guilt about educational investment was acute enough to be monetized. The salesman didn't just sell books, he sold the relief of having done something. You had bought the set, your children now had what they needed. The guilt was managed. What the encyclopedia business was really built on was the gap between what you knew and what you felt you ought to know, and the physical, visible proof that you were doing something about it. The books on the shelf were evidence. Every visitor who saw them was a small confirmation. This was not a weakness of the customer. It was a human need, and it was real. But that need was attached to a specific technology, the printed, multi-volume set. When the technology changed, the need didn't disappear. The way it was satisfied, however, changed completely. By 1993, three things arrived that together made the Encyclopedia Salesman's model unworkable. The first was a shiny disk, the second was the internet, and the third was free. In 1985, Microsoft approached Encyclopedia Britannica to propose creating a CD-ROM version of the encyclopedia. Britannica's management felt it would not fit with their traditional print-based offerings and rejected the offer. It was a reasonable decision in 1985. The CD-ROM market barely existed. The personal computer was not yet a household fixture. The encyclopedias were selling at record levels. There was no obvious reason to cannibalize a product generating hundreds of millions in annual revenue in exchange for an untested digital gamble. 8 years later, that decision looked different. In 1993, Microsoft launched Encarta, based on the Funk and Wagnalls encyclopedia, and priced the initial release at nearly $400. Sales were slow at first. Then Microsoft did something that changed everything. It dropped the price to $99 and began bundling Encarta with new Windows-based computers. By the end of 1993, it had become the best-selling CD encyclopedia with 350,000 copies. The price was never raised again, but even Encarta turned out to be a transitional technology rather than a destination. On January 15, 2001, Wikipedia went live. Unlike any encyclopedia before it, it was free and universally accessible. And thanks to its open volunteer model, it was updated collaboratively and almost instantly. By 2009, Wikipedia received 97% of the web traffic to online encyclopedias, while Encarta received a paltry 1.27%. That same year, Microsoft discontinued Encarta entirely. The 2010 version of the Britannica's 15th edition, spanning 32 volumes and 32,640 pages, was the last printed edition. In 2012, after 244 years of continuous print publication, Britannica announced it would no longer print physical copies. The encyclopedia that had once been carried into living rooms by men in pressed suits, laid open on kitchen tables, and purchased by parents who wanted to believe they were buying their children a future, was now free, online, updated by volunteers, and carried in every pocket on Earth. The encyclopedia salesman didn't lose because people stopped valuing knowledge. He lost because the container that held knowledge stopped having any advantage over its competitors. The physical book was heavy because it had to hold everything. The CD was light because it could compress it. The web was weightless because it had no container at all. Each transition made the previous format not just obsolete, but expensive in a way that felt, in retrospect, slightly absurd. What did not transfer across any of those transitions was the experience of the pitch itself. The man at the table, the child reaching for the book, the parent feeling the specific combination of aspiration and guilt that made them sign. That moment was, in its way, a masterwork of human persuasion. It understood exactly what people wanted and what they feared, and it handed them a physical object that addressed both at once. The object was what failed. The desire it was selling never went away. Most encyclopedia sets today carry retail values of less than $75. The full set that parents once signed payment plans to purchase, 32 volumes, 140 pounds of paper and ink, sells for less than the monthly payment they once made to own it. If you grew up in a house with a set of encyclopedias, you probably remember exactly where they lived, which shelf, which room. You remember the creak of the spine when you opened a volume for the first time. You remember looking something up and finding something else entirely, 3 pages away, and losing an hour to it. That is not nostalgia for inefficiency. It is nostalgia for a particular kind of discovery, unhurried, unalgorithmed, and entirely your own. Tell us in the comments, did your family have a set? Which brand? Do you remember the salesman coming to the door? Or the moment your parents said yes? And if you still have the volumes somewhere, what condition are they in? If you found this useful, please leave a like. It helps more people find the channel. Subscribe for more videos like this one.